Svetlana Okley was born on October 31, 1969 and was a Ukrainian criminal who lived in the city of Krasnodon in the Luhansk region. In 2012, together with her husband, she kidnapped a girl, Christina Kabakova. As it became known later, the abduction was committed in order to hide from the authorities and society the fact of the absence of their adopted children, in connection with their murder. It turns out that 42-year-old Svetlana Okley in 2011 took the lives of her adopted daughters, Lisa and Katya. This story caused a wide public outcry and shattered the psyche of many eyewitnesses. Comments are unnecessary here. The story has become popular not only within Ukraine, but also in many post-Soviet countries. The case was even discussed at the Moscow Famous, a talk show called Let Them Talk. Svetlana Okley was hated by tens of millions of viewers. And you can't blame them for that. The Okley family from Krasnodon, in the Luhansk region, was set as an example to all residents of the city. A mining family with 7 children lived well, happily and happily. There were 6 girls and 1 boy in the family. A boy and 2 girls, Lisa and Katya, were adopted. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that Svetlana Okley and her husband Alexander knew a lot about raising children, because they had them as role models. They spoke of the children as well-mannered and intelligent guys who always won all kinds of contests and competitions of a sporting and intellectual plan. 42-year-old mother Svetlana Okley bore the title of Heroine Mother, and was engaged in a good cause. She composed nursery rhymes, songs and fairy tales that were subsequently printed. Despite the fact that Svetlana was engaged in self-publishing, her literature was in demand among some acquaintances and just residents of the city. Svetlana also organized various children's and not only events within Krasnodon and the entire Luhansk region.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
In parallel with this, the woman was the founder of the Children's, a family ensemble called Okley. In 2003, the municipal administration of Krasnodon presented a large and exemplary family with a 5-room apartment in the very center of the city. Before that, the family lived in a nearby village, part of Krasnodon. In 2007, Svetlana She was honored to receive the title of Mother Heroine from the President of Ukraine Viktor Andreevich Yushchenko himself. But according to surveys of neighbors of an apartment building, the Okley family was described as unsociable, unfriendly and closed. In the first days of August 2012 to the police, a nervous call came in. It was a woman living in the village of Semikino, Krasnodon district, who reported the disappearance of Christina Kabakova's daughter. From her story it became clear that the girl was abducted by unknown people. According to the eldest son, who was nearby at the time of the abduction, a motorcycle with a sidecar drove up to them, in which an unfamiliar man and woman were sitting. Unknown people grabbed the girl and threw her into the sidecar of a motorcycle, after which they disappeared in an unknown direction. The entire police, including ordinary residents and volunteer organizations, were brought to their feet in the city. According to the description of the boy, a sketch of the kidnappers was compiled. All the pillars, entrances and fences were in the announcements about the abduction of Christina Kabakova with an attached sketch. Wanted. Thanks to the quick reaction and well-coordinated work of society and law enforcement agencies, it was still possible to get on the trail of the desired criminals. As it turned out, the frightened girl was found under the bed, littered with a lot of old rags and blankets at the dacha. Later, in a matter of minutes, the owners came here, who began to say that the girl was their daughter, and her name was Lisa. Soon the real parents of Christina Kabakova arrived at the house, who simply lost their heads from the shamelessness and rudeness on the part of Svetlana and Alexei Okley. Realizing that they had been discovered, the Okleys began to try in every possible way to get out of the situation, arguing that their 2 adopted daughters allegedly in the winter of last year, they were abducted by unknown persons. For some reason, they did not write a statement to the police, but decided to get even and steal someone else's child. There was also a son Ilya in the house, who stunned the authorities with his appearance. The boy was covered in abrasions and bruises like on his face. It never happened. Svetlana's adopted son Okley waited for the moment until his mother noticed and pulled one policeman by the hand, whispering to him, "Save me, take me away from here soon, otherwise they will kill me here together." When law enforcement officers remembered about Alexander's spouse, Svetlana said that he was not at home. However, a few minutes later he was found in the attic of the house where he wanted to hide. Alexander and Svetlana were immediately detained and a criminal case was opened. During the interrogations, the father and the eldest daughter wrote a sincere confession. The fact is that the true motives of the theft: the girl had a desire to replace her previously deceased daughter Katia. It turns out that in February 2011, the so-called heroine mother inflicted fatal injuries on her adopted daughter Lisa, and 9 months later, the second adopted daughter Katia died in the same way. It turns out that the kidnapped girl is needed. It was in order to replace one of the dead. In February 2011, Svetlana Okley set a cherished goal: to force her adopted children to do everything that is ordered, and on demand. Subsequently, if the unfortunate children contradicted the requirements, she applied to them physical strength. The children had a very difficult time, because the aggression of the mother went beyond reason. Svetlana Okley used maximum strength and anger for punishment. The first Lisa could not stand it, soon she died from her injuries. When the heroine mother realized that her adopted daughter had died, she ordered her husband and eldest daughter to destroy the body. Submitting to the will of an inadequate woman, they took Lisa's body out of town to a rural house in which they had previously lived. Thinking about how to get rid of the body, they came to the conclusion that it should be burned in a metal boiler. 9 months later, Katia's turn came. The case was not particularly different from the previous one. For the slightest disobedience, Svetlana turned to a kind of educational measures. Her body was buried on the territory of the same rural house outside the city. The story is also amazing because after 2 crimes, the Okley family continued, as before, to take part in cultural and social life of the city. During the court session, the eldest daughter Yulia Okley said that the children were punished almost every day, even for minor mistakes, stood in the corner for days. The severity and cruelty of Svetlana knew no limits. If the punished, standing in the corner, if he made an unnecessary movement or uttered some sound, then the mother would go into a rage and use force. Katia has always had big shots. Also in court, everyone was shocked after they found out that the loving mother did more cruel things that simply cannot be described here. 42-year-old Svetlana was charged with the murder of 2 daughters, Lisa and Katia. In addition, the husband Alexander, Svetlana herself and the eldest daughter Yulia were accused of kidnapping Christina Kabakova. Alexander and Svetlana were taken into custody, and Yulia was given freedom, due to the fact that she immediately repented and committed illegal actions, being influenced by her parents. At the same time, a criminal case was initiated against the management of the Juvenile Affairs Service. The police considered that the employees of the service had to monitor the family and the condition of the children accepted into it. As it is easy to guess, no one has done their job in good faith. It was also surprising that the girls' medical records showed vaccinations for May 2012, although they were deprived of their lives in 2011. On December 11, 2012, Alexander and Svetlana Okley, as well as their eldest daughter Yulia, appeared in court. Yulia and Alexander admitted their guilt and confirmed that Svetlana bullied and, in the end, she contributed to the death of 2 adopted daughters. Not a single representative of the judicial law enforcement agencies doubted the guilt of the heroine mother. The only oppositionist was herself. Svetlana Okley insisted that her children were abducted, and all the charges against her were fabricated. Svetlana's atrocities and sadism shocked even her lawyer, who called his client a real monster in the courtroom. In turn, Svetlana was offended by this wording and therefore was, "I have to find a new lawyer." At the trial, she convinced everyone that the charges were falsified, and her husband Alexander and daughter Yulia were lovers who wanted to put her behind bars. The forensic psychiatric examination found the woman sane. Svetlana Okley's sentence was only 15 years in prison, and her husband was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Daughter Yulia also received a 4-year sentence for helping with the crimes committed. However, due to pregnancy, she received a 3-year reprieve. After Svetlana's case, the pasting was made public. The society began to resonate about the too short term for the so-called heroine mother. As it turned out, Svetlana was pregnant, and this circumstance is mitigating. It saved the mother killer from the maximum punishment. It is almost unknown how Svetlana Okley lives in prison now. One can only guess what they do with such people in places not so remote. It is known that in March 2013, Alexander and Svetlana Okley filed appeals to the court. The case was considered on November 8, the sentences remained unchanged. Svetlana Okley has now served 9 years. I was also surprised that a year after the conclusion of the parents were not deprived of their parental rights. They're remaining without. The children of their parents were in boarding schools in the Luhansk region. A little later, law enforcement officers managed to attract Natalia Zimina, who was the head of the guardianship and guardianship sector. The prosecutor's office opened a criminal case against her on the fact of improper performance of official duties. Responsibilities. The woman received a surprisingly long ago lenient sentence, 2 years of probation. Now Svetlana is 52 years old, and in 2027 the criminal will be able to be released.